Moscow, late 1970s, the capital of the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War, a city built not only of concrete and steel, but of suspicion, silence, and constant observation. In Moscow, surveillance was not a theory, it was a way of life. Every street corner was watched, every telephone line was assumed to be monitored, every foreigner was followed, catalogued, and quietly evaluated. This was the city where the KGB operated with unmatched confidence, where counterintelligence was not reactive, but proactive, where mistakes were not forgiven, they were erased. For Western intelligence services, Moscow was the most dangerous posting in the world. Many officers entered, few lasted long. Some were exposed, some were expelled. Others disappeared from the intelligence map entirely. And yet, within this city, one American intelligence officer managed to operate for 6 consecutive years without being caught. He recruited sources, he collected classified information, he built a functioning intelligence network inside the Soviet system. And when his assignment ended, he left Moscow alive, unexposed, and successful. His survival was not the result of luck or daring heroics. It was the product of discipline, patience, and an understanding of how dangerous Moscow truly was. His story did not begin in the Soviet Union. It began quietly, far from the gray streets of Moscow, inside a secure office complex in Langley, Virginia.
In 1976, CIA headquarters was searching for a very specific type of candidate. Not a soldier, not a weapons specialist, not someone trained for physical confrontation. What the agency needed was someone who could disappear into Soviet society without attracting attention. Someone who could listen more than speak. Someone who could understand not only the Russian language, but the Russian mindset. That candidate was a professor. He taught Russian literature at Georgetown University. He spent his days analyzing novels, poetry, and historical texts. He did not look like an intelligence officer. He did not sound like one either. But what made him valuable was how he spoke Russian. Not the careful academic Russian taught in classrooms, but the living language spoken on the streets. He understood regional accents, slang, humor, and cultural shortcuts. He understood when a Russian was complaining, when they were testing boundaries, and when they were hinting at something they could not say openly. At the height of the Cold War, this ability mattered more than weapons training. The approach was discreet. A man in a gray suit, a friendly introduction, a conversation that felt informal, an invitation to have coffee. There was no dramatic reveal, no sudden declaration of espionage. The proposal was framed calmly. His country needed him, not as a fighter, but as an observer, someone who could blend in, form relationships, and report what he learned. He did not accept immediately.
He had a comfortable life, a stable career, a wife, a young daughter, no desire for danger or secrecy. The recruiter understood this and did not pressure him. Instead, he explained the stakes, the risk of miscalculation between nuclear superpowers, the danger of acting on bad intelligence, the role accurate information played in preventing catastrophic decisions. It was not a conversation about heroism. It was a conversation about responsibility. The discussions lasted months, multiple meetings, long periods of reflection. Eventually, the professor agreed. Training began immediately, and it was nothing like popular culture portrayed. There were no car chases or gun battles. Instead, there was repetition, discipline, mental conditioning. He was taught to assume that at all times, someone was watching him. He learned surveillance detection routes, long and exhausting paths through busy cities designed to expose anyone following too closely. He learned how to observe without appearing to observe, how to notice reflections in windows, how to count footsteps without turning his head. He learned how to communicate without communicating. Dead drops, coded language, indirect signals. He learned how to construct a cover identity so detailed and consistent that it could withstand prolonged questioning by KGB counterintelligence officers. Most importantly, he learned a rule that would define his survival. Never break character. Not in moments of fear. Not under pressure. Not even when alone.
His cover was intentionally mundane. He would serve as a cultural attaché at the American Embassy in Moscow. His duties included teaching English, organizing cultural exchanges, and attending public events. A bureaucratic role. Predictable. Boring. Exactly what was required. After 6 months of preparation, in January 1978, he boarded a plane bound for Moscow. The moment he stepped off the aircraft, the cold struck him. -20 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that made breathing painful. Sheremetyevo Airport was gray and oppressive. Concrete walls, stern faces, minimal conversation. At passport control, a Soviet officer examined his documents slowly, flipping through every page. Questions were asked sharply, in Russian. The answers came calmly, fluently, without hesitation. There was no sign of nervousness. Eventually, the stamp was placed on the passport. He was inside. Outside, the embassy vehicle waited. As they drove into the city, he noticed a black Volga sedan maintaining a careful distance behind them. KGB surveillance. It was immediate, and it would not stop. His apartment was modest, overlooking a street where surveillance vehicles parked openly. There was no attempt to hide the monitoring. This was intentional. It was meant to be seen. A reminder that privacy did not exist here. Inside the walls of the American Embassy, there was a measure of safety. Outside, every movement belonged to hostile territory.
Only one person inside the embassy knew his real mission, the CIA station chief. In a secured room lined with soundproofing material and white noise generators, the rules were explained clearly. Everything you do is observed. Everything you say is recorded. Trust nothing. Your job is to live your cover, make contacts, and recruit sources when the opportunity presents itself. But never forget, this is their city. They are better at this game than we are. The next morning, he began teaching English at a cultural center. His students were polite, curious, and cautious. Some were genuinely interested in learning. Others were almost certainly reporting on him. He maintained a neutral tone. He avoided politics. He never criticized the Soviet system, but he listened carefully. Complaints about bureaucracy, frustration with corruption, small expressions of resentment. These were the signals he watched for. 3 months into his assignment, one student stood out. His name was Dmitry, a physicist in his mid-30s, intelligent, articulate, quietly bitter. Their conversations extended beyond the classroom, coffee in public places, discussions about literature, music, and life in Moscow. Over time, Dmitry spoke openly about being passed over for promotion, replaced by someone with better party connections. Trust was built slowly, deliberately, without pressure.
The moment of approach came months later, during a walk through Gorky Park. A carefully phrased comment, a suggestion that ideas and information did not have to remain confined. Dmitry stopped walking and looked at him closely. This was the moment everything could end. Dmitry could walk away and report him. Instead, he asked a question. From that moment on, the operation truly began. Once Dmitry asked that question, nothing was the same again. From that moment forward, the relationship shifted from casual acquaintance to something far more dangerous. There was no shake hand, no spoken agreement, no dramatic declaration. In Moscow, recruitment rarely happened in a single sentence. It unfolded quietly, through implication and understanding. Both men knew the risks. Both understood that even acknowledging the conversation could end their lives as they knew them. So they said very little. They finished their walk, spoke about ordinary things, and parted ways as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, a line had been crossed.
Direct meetings stopped almost immediately. They were too risky, too visible. Instead, the American taught Dmitry the basics of tradecraft, carefully and gradually, never overwhelming him. The methods had to feel natural, unremarkable, almost boring. Dead drops became their primary means of communication. Locations were chosen for their normality, public parks, benches that hundreds of people passed every day, areas where movement did not attract attention. Dmitry would photograph documents using simple equipment and hide the film inside ordinary containers. Jack would retrieve them later, blending the act into his daily routine. One of the most effective covers was exercise. Jack began jogging regularly, something that fit perfectly with his public persona, a foreigner trying to stay healthy in a harsh climate.
His routes changed constantly. Different parks, different times, sometimes early morning, sometimes late afternoon. Sometimes he stopped to stretch, sometimes he slowed down to catch their breath near a specific location. To an observer, it looked like nothing. To Jack, every step was calculated.
The KGB surveillance teams were persistent, but they were also human. They worked long hours, they followed routines. If someone appeared harmless long enough, attention softened. That was the advantage Jack relied on. He did not rush operations. He did not collect intelligence every week. Sometimes he waited a month between drops. The goal was not volume. The goal was survival. The information Dmitri provided was real and valuable. Details about scientific research, names of personnel involved in classified projects, technical assessments that analysts in Langley could cross-check against other intelligence streams. It was not sensational, but it was precise, and precision mattered. But one source was never enough. Jack knew that relying on a single individual was dangerous. If Dmitri was compromised, everything would collapse. He needed redundancy, a network. Over the next year, Jack slowly expanded his reach. Through cultural events, lectures, and academic gatherings, he met people from different parts of Soviet society. He never approached anyone quickly. Months were spent observing behavior, listening for subtle expressions of dissatisfaction, signs of ideological doubt, financial stress, professional resentment. In espionage, motivation mattered more than access. Someone with access but no motivation was useless. Someone with motivation but no access was dangerous.
One of his next recruits was Irina, a secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was not a policymaker. She did not attend high-level meetings, but she handled documents. She typed cables. She saw names, dates, and agendas. More importantly, she felt invisible, underpaid, ignored. When Jack spoke with her, he never mentioned politics. He spoke about frustration, about wasted talent, about how systems often failed the people who kept them running. It took nearly 6 months before he made any suggestion beyond casual conversation. When the moment came, Irina did not hesitate. She had already made up her mind long before. Another source was Victor, a mid-level officer in the Soviet army, intelligent and capable, but repeatedly blocked from advancement by older, more connected superiors. Victor's motivation was not ideological, it was resentment. He believed the system rewarded loyalty over competence. Jack never argued with him. He listened. He validated Victor's experience without criticizing the Soviet state directly. Over time, Victor began sharing information voluntarily, small things at first. Eventually, the relationship formalized into something far more dangerous. Each source was handled separately. They did not know about one another. They did not meet. They did not share methods. Jack compartmentalized everything. If one source was compromised, the others might survive. That principle guided every decision he made.
But success increased risk. The more active Jack became, the greater the chance of a mistake. In his 3rd year in Moscow, that risk nearly became reality. One morning, while retrieving a dead drop in Sokolniki Park, Jack felt a subtle shift in the environment. Nothing obvious, no sudden movement, just a sense that the rhythm around him had changed. He completed his surveillance detection route, changed transportation multiple times, walked through crowded areas. Everything appeared clear. He reached the location, retrieved the concealed film, and continued jogging. Then a voice spoke behind him. A simple comment, casual, friendly. Jack's heart rate spiked instantly, but his expression did not change. He turned slowly. A man in a gray coat stood nearby, well-dressed, calm, observant. The man commented on the trees, on the beauty of the park. He mentioned seeing Jack jogging there before. He asked about his work at the American embassy. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Nothing incriminating was said, nothing threatening, but the message was unmistakable. "We see you." Jack responded politely, in flawless Russian. He spoke about fitness, about enjoying Moscow's parks. He showed no fear. When the man finally walked away, Jack did not alter his pace. He finished his jog normally. Only later, inside his apartment, did the tension surface.
That evening, he reported the encounter to the station chief. The decision was immediate. All operations would stop. No dead drops, no communication, no contact with sources. For at least 2 months, Jack would live entirely within his cover. Those 2 months were some of the hardest of his assignment. He knew intelligence was being lost. Opportunities were slipping away. His sources were active and capable, but patience was survival. He taught classes. He attended concerts. He gave lectures on American literature. He became invisible through boredom. Slowly, the intensity of surveillance decreased. The KGB had limited resources. Without evidence, they could not justify constant pressure. When operations resumed, Jack was more cautious than ever. Longer gaps between contacts, fewer drops, more emphasis on safety than productivity. Then, in his 4th year, something went wrong. Victor stopped communicating. No signals, no messages, no response. Jack assumed the worst, that Victor had been arrested, that interrogation had begun, that names would follow. Weeks passed with no information. Jack carefully investigated through indirect channels. Eventually, he learned the truth. Victor had not been arrested. He had been transferred, sent to a base in Siberia. A routine reassignment, nothing more. Relief followed quickly, but so did a lesson. In Moscow, silence did not always mean exposure. Sometimes it meant life simply moved on.
Still, Victor was gone. Access to military information was reduced. Jack needed a replacement. That replacement arrived unexpectedly. Alexei was a colonel in the Soviet Army, well-educated, cultured, open-minded in ways Jack had rarely seen among Soviet officers. They met after a lecture Jack gave on American cinema. Their conversation extended late into the evening. They spoke about film, history, philosophy. Alexei was curious about the West, but not naive. Their relationship developed naturally, without operational intent at first. They became friends in the truest sense of the word. Alexei invited Jack to his apartment, introduced him to his wife. They shared meals, vodka, long discussions about the nature of power and loyalty. Over time, Jack realized that Alexei was deeply disillusioned. He had seen corruption destroy careers. He had watched incompetent leaders rise, while capable officers were sidelined. He believed the system no longer served its people. The recruitment did not feel like a recruitment. One evening, Alexei spoke quietly about wishing he could make a real difference. That was enough. Jack explained carefully that there were ways to influence history quietly, to prevent misunderstandings, to save lives through information. Alexei did not react with shock. He asked one question: what would happen to his family if he were caught?
Jack did not lie. He told the truth. There were no guarantees. There were risks, but there would be efforts to protect them. Alexei took time to think. When he agreed, it was with full awareness of what he was doing. Alexei became Jack's most valuable source and the most dangerous to manage. Managing Alexei was unlike handling any source Jack had worked with before. As a colonel, Alexei operated in a world where scrutiny was constant. His movements, his meetings, even his attitude were observed by colleagues trained to notice deviation. One careless action could trigger suspicion. One unexplained absence could lead to an inquiry. Jack understood immediately that traditional methods would not be enough. The tradecraft had to evolve. It had to become invisible. Alexei never removed documents from secure facilities. That alone would have raised alarms. Instead, he memorized schedules, absorbed strategic discussions, and photographed only what he could do without drawing attention. Late at night, after offices emptied, he used moments of solitude that were part of his normal routine. The information he gathered was concealed inside ordinary objects, everyday items that meant nothing on their own: a notebook, a folded newspaper, a box of chocolates purchased as a gift. The brilliance of the method was its banality. Nothing about it suggested espionage.
Transfers were never direct. Sometimes Alexei left an item behind intentionally, as if forgotten. Jack would encounter it later, pick it up, look around briefly, and carry on. To anyone watching, it appeared random, unconnected, harmless. But inside those moments were assessments of troop readiness, strategic priorities, internal disagreements within the Soviet military, the kind of information that analysts in Langley rarely saw with such clarity. The intelligence Alexei provided reshaped understanding at the highest levels. It confirmed suspicions. It corrected assumptions. It prevented dangerous miscalculations. And it placed enormous pressure on Jack. One mistake now would not just expose a network, it could destabilize entire operations. As the fourth year turned into the fifth, the atmosphere in Moscow changed. Jack felt it before he saw evidence. Surveillance became tighter. Faces in the crowd felt more familiar. Routes that once felt clean now carried a sense of tension. The KGB was not targeting him specifically. They were launching a broader operation. Intelligence had reached them that Western services were running multiple sources inside the city. They did not know who, but they were determined to find out.
The counterintelligence response was methodical. Surveillance teams expanded. New officers rotated into familiar positions. Patterns were analyzed. Behavior was cross-referenced. But the most dangerous tactic was deception. The KGB began circulating false information through channels they believed were compromised. Fabricated weapons programs, invented research initiatives, entirely fictional projects designed to attract collectors. They watched carefully to see who reacted. When the warning reached the American embassy, the station chief did not hesitate. Assume everything is a trap. Trust nothing. Jack understood immediately what this meant. All operations would stop. Not slow down, not reduce. Stop entirely. Emergency procedures were activated. Signals were sent to sources. Simple messages. Do nothing. Do not attempt contact. Do not change behavior. Wait. Silence became the only defense. For months, Jack collected nothing. He passed no information. He took no risks. He was simply a cultural attaché, teaching classes, attending performances, giving lectures on American authors, reading Russian literature in public spaces where surveillance could see him doing nothing of value. The pressure was psychological. Jack knew his sources were still out there. He knew they were waiting. He knew they were risking their lives by association alone, but movement now would have been fatal. Patience was not a choice. It was survival. The KGB operation continued for months. They arrested several minor figures, low-level sources who had been careless. Some were interrogated. Some disappeared into the system. But Jack remained untouched. His name never surfaced. His network stayed intact. Eventually, the pressure eased. Surveillance intensity dropped. Resources shifted elsewhere. The storm passed without consuming him. When limited operations resumed, Jack was more cautious than ever. Fewer contacts, longer gaps, more reliance on indirect observation than active collection. Alexei remained productive, but communication was reduced to essentials only. No unnecessary risks, no curiosity-driven requests. Everything was filtered through one question: is this worth exposure? In his 6 years, a message arrived from Langley. His assignment was nearing its end. 6 years in Moscow was already extraordinary. Staying longer increased the risk of pattern recognition, of familiarity breeding suspicion. It was time to leave. The final phase was the most emotionally difficult. Jack began transitioning his sources to new handlers. Carefully, gradually, no sudden changes. Each introduction was controlled, limited, and designed to preserve trust. For some sources, the handover was purely procedural. For others, it felt like abandonment. Dmitri was the hardest, the first source, the foundation of everything that followed. Over the years, their relationship had grown beyond operational necessity. They had shared fears, hopes, regrets. In their final meeting, there was no talk of politics or intelligence. Dmitri asked one simple question: would they ever see each other again? Jack did not lie. He said he did not know. In their world, honesty mattered more than comfort. Dmitri thanked him, not for money, not for protection, but for purpose, for making him feel that his choices had meaning. They shook hands, and Jack walked away knowing it was almost certainly the last time. The final days in Moscow felt unreal. Farewell gatherings, polite speeches, routine paperwork, all while surveillance remained constant. The KGB followed him openly, to the airport, to the gate,
watching until the very end. Only when the plane lifted off the runway did the tension finally release. 6 years, hundreds of reports, multiple sources, no exposure. Jack survived not because he was fearless. He survived because he respected the danger. He never assumed safety. He never rushed success. He understood that Moscow was not a place you defeated. It was a place you endured.
Years later, after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, some of Jack's sources were able to leave. They built new lives in the West. Dmitry emigrated to the United States and returned to academia. One evening, in Washington, 2 older men met for dinner. Gray hair now, slower movements, but the same understanding. They spoke about Moscow, about fear, about choices made under pressure. Dmitry asked if it had been worth it. Jack considered the question carefully. The information had helped leaders understand reality. It had reduced uncertainty. It may have prevented conflict. In a world balanced on misunderstanding, that mattered. His answer was simple. Yes, because real intelligence work is not about heroics. It is not loud. It is not cinematic. It is quiet, patient, and deeply human. It happens in parks, in silence, in decisions that leave no trace. And sometimes, when done with discipline and restraint, it works exactly as intended. Looking back, what Jack Morrison accomplished in Moscow was not extraordinary because of spectacle, but because of restraint. He did not survive by outsmarting the KGB in dramatic confrontations or bold maneuvers. He survived because he understood something many intelligence officers learned too late. Moscow was not a place to prove brilliance. It was a place to avoid mistakes. From the moment he arrived, Jack assumed he was already compromised. That assumption shaped every decision he made. He never believed he had privacy. He never believed surveillance had relaxed completely. Even on days when the Black Volga did not appear as close as usual, he behaved as if it were still there. This mindset prevented complacency, the most common killer of intelligence officers operating in hostile environments. Discipline was his first defense. He followed routines that appeared natural, but were never rigid. He changed routes often. He avoided habits that could be mapped. He resisted the temptation to collect information simply because it was available. Every operation had to justify its risk. If it did not, it was postponed or abandoned entirely. In a city where the opposition controlled the terrain, patience was more powerful than aggression. Another reason for his survival was respect. Jack never underestimated the KGB. He did not treat them as faceless adversaries or incompetent bureaucrats. He understood that many of the men and women watching him were professionals, trained from a young age to detect deception. They were operating on their own soil, in their own language, within a system designed to support them. Assuming superiority would have been fatal.
Jack also understood that intelligence work was not about ideology alone. It was about people. Every source he recruited was motivated by something deeply personal. Dmitry wanted dignity and purpose. Irina wanted recognition and fairness. Victor wanted justice for his wasted career. Alexei wanted to believe that his life had meaning beyond serving a corrupt system. Jack never pressured them. He never rushed them. He allowed them to arrive at their own decisions. That respect built loyalty stronger than fear ever could. Equally important was Jack's willingness to stop. Many intelligence failures occur not during action, but during success. When information flows easily, when operations appear smooth, officers begin to believe they are invisible. Jack resisted that illusion. When warned, he shut everything down. When pressure increased, he disappeared into his cover. He accepted lost opportunities as the cost of survival. In Moscow, doing nothing at the right moment was often the most courageous choice. When his plane lifted off from Sheremetyevo Airport for the final time, Jack did not feel triumph. He felt exhaustion. 6 years of constant vigilance had taken their toll. He had lived every day knowing a single mistake could destroy not only his life, but the lives of those who trusted him. Leaving Moscow did not erase that weight immediately. It faded slowly, over time, as distance replaced danger.
Back in the United States, Jack returned to a quieter existence. His work remained classified, his achievements undocumented. To the outside world, he was just another former diplomat. The reports he had written were absorbed into archives. The intelligence he provided was folded into broader assessments. Decisions were made at levels he would never see. That was the nature of the profession. Success left no public trace. Years later, when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, fragments of Jack's past resurfaced in unexpected ways. Some of his former sources were finally able to leave the shadows. Dmitry emigrated to the United States and resumed an academic career. Irina disappeared into private life. Alexei's fate remained uncertain, known only in fragments. These were not stories told in memoirs or documentaries. They were quiet endings to lives shaped by dangerous choices. When Jack and Dmitry met again in Washington, decades later, the reunion was subdued. There were no grand gestures, just two older men sharing a meal, remembering a city that no longer existed in the same way. They spoke about Moscow not with nostalgia, but with clarity, about the fear, the tension, the moments where everything could have ended. Dmitry asked again if it had been worth it.
Jack answered carefully. The information had helped leaders understand intentions rather than guess them. It had reduced uncertainty during one of the most dangerous periods in human history. It may have prevented miscalculations that could have led to catastrophic consequences. In intelligence work, outcomes are rarely certain, but reducing risk is sometimes enough. Jack Morrison's story is not unique. Thousands of intelligence officers lived similar lives during the Cold War. Most will never be named. Some failed. Some were imprisoned. Some did not survive. Others, like Jack, succeeded quietly. Their victories were invisible, their mistakes unforgiving. Together, they shaped history from the shadows. The Cold War was not fought only with missiles and armies. It was fought in conversations, in parks, in offices after dark. It was fought through patience, discipline, and human judgment. Jack spent 6 years inside the most dangerous city on Earth, not because he was fearless, but because he understood fear and respected it. That is how he survived. Not by being bold, not by being reckless, but by being careful. And in the real world of intelligence, that is often the difference between disappearing into history and never being seen at all.